Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture CropTalk webinar. If you have any questions today, please type them into the Q&A icon located at the bottom toolbar, and we'll answer them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the October 25th edition of Crop Talk. And we were talking just before we got started here, and some parts of the province are white right now, and that would be a lot of the areas in the southwest. And I think after today, we're maybe going to see a little bit more of that. And I guess with that, it's starting to look like we might have a couple days to be inside and doing some figuring and putting some numbers together. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity to get Darren Bond on. And Darren is going to go through a few things today, but with the weather just before harvest finished up, or in most areas finished up, there was a lot of, I guess, wet or grain that needed to get some extra work done for safe storage. So Darren's going to talk a bit about the grain bin and farm bin building rentals, as it's the time of year where we might have been borrowing bins, or we might be looking at putting machinery away, and also grain drying, which has been happening probably for the last 2 weeks here in most of the areas. So get that information up, and then also update our 2023 projections as we finished got the crop in the bin. Now it's time to put some numbers to it and start planning for the 24 crops. So with that, Darren, if you'd like to take it away, and we'll get going.
Sounds good. Just share my screen here. You just tell me if you can see if I've got it up and ready to go.
Okay.
Not yet. I'm just still seeing Lionel's screen.
Okay.
It says I'm viewing Darren's, but it's the main screen. Is that what you have up, Darren?
Okay. Yeah, that's what I have up.
The October 5th grain bin and farm rental calculator. It's Lionel's first screen. Maybe.
Okay.
I don't see our presentation.
Let me try this one more time.
You got it.
Just go to your next slide, Darren.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah. So you can see it now. Sorry about that. Technology is great when it works. So yeah, like Lionel said, we're going to talk a little bit about things. You know what? We're almost at Halloween, so this is almost like a grab bag of different topics here. Going from grain bin rentals. Also going to talk bin fan electricity costs. That's something we get a lot of questions on. The farm building rentals, if we're talking about storing equipment, whether you're an owner of the sheds or looking to put something somewhere, just to be able to put some numbers to these things. Grain drying costs, a lot of the crop did come off tough, especially with all the green stocks that we had to fight this year, it seems like. So we can look at that and run some different numbers and see what that looks like, whether we're getting it done at a neighbor's or doing it ourselves or doing it for a neighbor. We're going to look at our year-end crop budget. We're going to take those 2023 projections, roll them into actuals, and then what do we do with that? We're going to talk about that cost of bushel sold calculation, how it can impact what we look at for marketing. We're going to look at the interest carrying costs on stored grain. That's something I don't think there's enough discussion about, considering the relative high value of these crops and also the higher interest rates that we're facing. We're going to have a rant on fertilizer costs. A discussion on fertilizer costs. Is it cheap? Is it expensive? Looking at that, and then also tie some agronomy in there and looking at some 4R beneficial management practices and putting dollar signs to different timings and placements, things like that. And then lastly, we're going to talk about a couple of resources that our farm management team have that we're going to release here. And And you know what? We're going to put Lionel on the spot for that. We're going to ask him some tough questions. He's always asking the panelists some tough questions. So we're going to turn the tables a little bit. We're going to ask him some questions here on equipment values and how much they've changed over the last couple of years. So let's just jump right into it. Grain bin costing. So we have a calculator. Farm management, we have almost a calculator for everything, it seems. If you simply search grain bin farm building rental cost planner or calculator at the top, Manitoba Agriculture, it will bring you to this. We have it in both Excel and also an online version, which will work on your phone or iPad, tablet, whatever the case may be. And it works really good and gives you instant numbers here. So this is just a screenshot, just going to take a few numbers and just take two scenarios and show you what some of these numbers could be. So taking a 17,000 bushel bin, for this cost, we're going to use $3 per bushel for bin cost. I'm going to speak a little bit more about that bin cost in the second example, just to show. We can change everything in the white cells here, 20-year depreciation, that's kind of common. Some different rates here for between investment rate, the repair, insurance, taxes, and the like. And we end up coming up with a number that we can use on a cost per bushel per year basis or a cost per bushel per month. And it gives us our totals here, so we can kind of fact check and make sure that our insurance cost is accurate and our repair cost is accurate. So it's a really quick and easy way to come up with what the costing is for these bins. And so if I jump into my second example here, if we take a smaller bin, but let's say it's a hopper bin, for example, let's say it's relatively new, we're going to use $5.50 per bushel of bin cost. What does that do for the costing? And we can see here that it really increases the cost. And that's where what we assign for a value of that bin cost is very sensitive to these calculations. So I'll get a question quite a bit. People will be using this and saying, love it, but what should I be using for that bin cost calculation? My bin's 20 years old, so it's fully depreciated. However, it's still a good bin. It's really good, full floor aeration or whatever the case may be. It's really good, but what should I use? And so a lot of our clients will use $2 or $3 per bushel for a bin cost. Going back up in this bin cost section to be able to come up with a number, because when you have a brand new bin, you just put in your bin cost there and it gives a number. But what happens when you have a fully depreciated bin? So that's a little user tip to use. So for what it's worth, for market rates, for talking with producers across Manitoba, a lot of times it's anywhere in that 5 cents per bushel per year to 25 cents per bushel per year. The lower end is going to get you a flat bottom bin with no type of aeration. The higher end of that rate is going to give you a nice hopper bin with good aeration. So that's the market rates that I hear for whatever that's worth and those would be for used bins, well-used bins, ones again that are fully depreciated. So hopefully that helps out. To throw some numbers in here, play with these numbers. I think it's really good and easy way to come up with values. And then the other thing, and you're going to see this as a common theme with all of our tools here, it's an independent and unbiased tool that if there's a disagreement between family members or neighbors or the landlord and the farmer about how to value these bins, at least there's a way to come up with valuing the cost of storage and what this costs. So I think it's pretty good to be able to do that. Quick shout out to MASC's their website. I know Lionel has mentioned this many times before about their bin volume calculators. Depending on the type of bin, type of pile, whatever the case may be, they have a bunch of different calculators on here for the different sizes of bins. Use those. Those are great to be able to estimate how many bushels, because again, going back to that bin rental calculator, you need to know how many bushels you're charging on. And, sometimes, maybe we knew it, maybe we didn't. In the past, if that knowledge is lost, do some measurements, you can come up with a pretty close estimation of how many bushels those bins hold. So I think that's an important thing for people to use as well. Another big question that we get is on bin fans. How much does it cost with respect to electricity to run bin fans? So very roughly, every horsepower of bin fan consumes roughly 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. So the equation for that is you take your bin fan horsepower times the 1 kilowatt per hour times the dollars per kilowatt hour, and that gives you a dollars per hour of operation. I got some examples here to make this a little bit easier. So here's a bunch of numbers. Feel free to take a picture, screenshot of this to find your bin size. But if we take a 10 horsepower fan right at the bottom here, 10 horsepower would use 10 kilowatt hours. The kilowatt hour rate that's actually just pulled from my hydro bill, the latest one I had, was just under 10 cents. So that gives just under $1 an hour of operation for electricity costs, or just under $23 per day of electricity costs. So I know a lot of landlords or neighbors, if you're renting bins from neighbors, turn the fan on, log when you turn it on, log when you turn it off, figure out how many hours it is or how many days it is. And there's some pretty reasonable and quick calculations as to how much this costs. And we can see when we get into the bigger horsepower fans, especially if we have tough wheat and we need to bring it down, and these fans are on for a considerable amount of time, the costs can add up. So this just brings, again, clarity to the situation about how much electricity is used. Again, as rates change, feel free to put in your own rate and go from there. But I think this is something that is very useful. And again, we get a lot of questions about how much does it cost to run aeration. Moving on to building costs. So this would be pole sheds, for example, whatever the case may be for storing equipment over the winter. Hopefully we're at that point. We're almost about that point where we put this equipment away for the season. This calculator, again, works really good to be able to come up with some ideas for numbers. We can put in the building size and it calculates a total square foot. We can put in a building cost for what this costs. And again, we get the same questions. What happens if it's a fully depreciated piece of equipment? How do we value the building cost? It's not an easy, straightforward answer, unfortunately. But a lot of these buildings still have decent value. So, we'll often see even fully depreciated buildings, still be anywhere from 30 to 100,000, depending on how big the building is. So we can put in, again, our investment rates, repair rates, the insurance costs, taxes, of course, because we always got to pay taxes on these, and come up with some numbers that approximate what the cost rental would be, whether that be on the full building or whether that be on a square footage basis. So the square footage basis would be maybe someone that's renting out their shed and you're going to park a combine in there, so you're not using the whole shed, you're just using part of it, so you can figure out the square foot footprint of the piece of equipment you're putting in there. Use this math to come up with an estimation of how much it costs. Again, it's really independent and unbiased to come up with this. If we can agree on those input numbers, then it looks at what these costs are from a cost basis and gives us some pretty good calculations. Moving on to grain drying. So with grain drying, again, this is looking at it from a costing basis. Again, internet search Manitoba Agriculture grain drying cost calculator. A few years ago, we added natural gas into the calculator. So that's been, so we can look at both propane and natural gas. We can do both batch and continuous. I got two scenarios. I got a batch propane, and then I got a continuous natural gas that we'll look at. But we can put in our inputs. We can pick the type of crop that we're selecting. We can pick the estimated market price per ton on that crop. We then put in our outside air temperatures, our drying temperature, our start moisture, and then our final moisture to be able to set up the calculations. And then we can move on to picking how many bushels the dryer holds, the hours for batch. In this case, as it's the batch, we can put in our electricity costs, propane costs, and the electric motors. And a very important part is putting in the cost of the grain dryer and any other, augers, electrical, whatever the case may be, in bins. We have these numbers or will be auto-populated, but just like anything with all these numbers, the more you can get it to your own numbers, the more accurate you're going to be. And it's going to be more reflective of your situation. So once we've put in all these numbers, we can then generate the grain drying report. And the grain drying report will come in under cost per hour, cost per bushel, and a cost per ton. So we can look in this, in the top half of the screen, that's the operating costs. We can see that on the cost per bushel, we're nearly $1 a bushel of operating costs. Once we factor in the cost of the fixed assets, dryer, bins, everything like that, we can then come up with the total cost of drying. In this case, it's just over $1 a bushel. So I encourage you to throw in different starting moistures. We go for, corn. It was a handful of years ago where, corn was at 27, 28. You put that number in there and be sitting down when you look at the cost of drying report. And we can see how much that can change, or we change the outside air temperatures, those types of things. We worked with Prairie Ag Machinery Institute, PAMI, with this. So a lot of the engineering numbers came from them, and they use it quite a bit too. And it's a really good tool for that. So let's look at a different scenario. Let's look at continuous flow natural gas. So we're going to keep everything else the same. That's the only two things that we're changing. We're going to keep the temperatures and the moistures the same. We're just going to move from a continuous flow to natural gas. And we can see here that there's a huge drop in the costing. Just, obviously natural gas is a lot more efficient. Now, in this example, I did keep the dryer costs the same. Now, you could argue, well, we should have a maybe more expensive dryer. Maybe if we had to pay for natural gas to come in, we have to amortize those costs, and that's totally legit. And that's something that when we go into changing those costs, we can do that and tailor our drying report to us. So and again, that's the importance of coming up with your own numbers for this to be as accurate as you can. But we can see some of the differences, and that's something when talking to a few farmers this season about thinking about making that substantial investment of switching from propane to natural gas. This allows us to use this calculator and see, are we actually having a cheaper drying in the big scheme of things? Yes, it's going to be cheaper because natural gas is cheaper, but when we factor in the investment, is it going to be cheaper? And then essentially it's just the cost benefit analysis, and this is a big part of being able to do that, to say, okay, how much are we going to drive down our drying costs? Are we going to drive down our drying costs when we consider our fixed expenses? And what other benefits that may we have on the farm with this, and start to be able to come up with a decision using numbers and coming up with good decisions on the farm. And that's something that in farm management we're always beating that drum, is to use these tools, use dollars and cents to make these good decisions on the farm. So it's a great calculator. If you're drying, or if you're going to get someone to dry, or if you're negotiating with a neighbor, use this one. It's a really good calculator to use. And again, this one you can use on your phones or tablets as well. So we're going to move on into budgeting. Again, we're going through the Halloween treat bag here, and we're finding something different to munch on here. So let's talk about using these projections and turning these projections into our actual numbers and what we can do with those actual numbers. I'm going to use a tool that we have, it's CropPlan. It's only in Excel. It doesn't matter what you use, how you use it, whether it's pencil and paper, whether it's your own spreadsheet, or whether it's with one of the advisors that you're working with. It doesn't matter. The big thing is to make sure that you have your own cost of production numbers in there and come up with your own numbers. And this is just a screenshot from the crop plan. We can come up with our seed costs. We know what those are, our fertilizer costs, and we just go down the page, taking these costs and putting in our actual numbers. Get a question on how do you handle things like fuel, for example. Well, if you're not assigning fuel to specific crops, then you can just take your whole farm fuel bill, divide it by your acres, and prorate it and do it that way. That's an easy way to do it. Don't overthink some of this stuff. If we're getting into analyzing different crops and what is the most profitable, obviously starting with the big ones of seed, fert, chem, those costs, those will be the ones that we try to assign on a commodity specific basis. But when it comes down to things like property taxes or miscellaneous costs, or whatever the case may be, even if we just prorate it on a whole farm basis, that's better than nothing, and that'll at least move us towards accuracy. And then if we find that we have some crops that, say, using that fuel example, that we're using more fuel, like say on maybe a corn versus a no-till wheat, for example, then we can start to shift some more of that fuel cost onto those crops to get as accurate as we can as possible. But I'd say as long as we're using the numbers, start there. Don't sweat the small stuff yet, and move to that point, and we'll be that much better for it. So when we got all those numbers in, and this is where I think the real cool thing is, I guess maybe if you're a farm management geek, you think it's cool, maybe you don't, but I really think that these numbers are very empowering for what we can do with these numbers. So we can see here that we have our costing, and we come up with a total cost of $525 per acre. And we're using the canola example just for sake of argument. So these costs are now in for the most part, and there's only a little bit left in the season. We can probably take a small projection if there's any other costing, say trucking or whatever the case may be, but that number is going to be fairly accurate in how much actual numbers are in there now. And now at the end of the year, we can take our yield. This says estimated, but I would switch your estimated to actual. And then we come up with the numbers here near the bottom of our break-even prices. And this is on a price per bushel or cost per bushel. And I really love these numbers, because what this number tells me is it starts to say, where's my floor? Where am I making money for my marketings, and where am I losing money? So the canola market's been under a little bit of pressure lately. This break-even price, we're still profitable at these numbers, but we can see where if the year wasn't 44 bushels an acre, if it was something in the high 30s, all of a sudden our break-even costs start to edge up, and especially with this recent slide in commodity prices, we might start to get into that break-even, or might even be at that break-even price. So that's where it's important to know where we are, especially when we start to get close to that line. Again, this will allow us to identify selling opportunities. And my favorite saying is, no one's ever lost the farm selling at a profit. This, to me anyways, provides that sleep at night factor, knowing where your costs are on a cost per bushel sold. So another neat thing that we can look at is, because we never ever sell all of our grain at the same price, obviously, right? We usually sell in increments, and we have different pricing depending on when our cash flow needs are, when we perceive market rallies and sell into that. So one of the things that I think is important to realize is that what is our break-even price on our remaining unsold or unpriced inventory? Because there's risk with this unpriced inventory, right? So we need to be able to be aware of that. So this calculator is kind of neat in the sense that it'll take in any existing sales that you may have and then do a calculation and say, okay, well, for the remaining inventory, your break-even price in this case is just under $10 a bushel. So again, it gives you some sense of security and comfort in when we do our marketing. If we take a different scenario, and if we end up selling the grain maybe at a little bit lower price, say we had storage issues, we had to just be a little bit of a price taker and sell some of this grain, and we sell it under what we're maybe targeting to sell at $15.50. We made a $14.50 sale, for example. We can see how that affects our break-even price on our unpriced inventory. Now here, there's still really good margin using this example. So, there's still a lot of comfort. But again, when we're closer to that break even, when times are a little tighter, maybe the crop wasn't quite as good, we didn't get the rains, whatever the case may be, we can now see how close to the line we are, monitor that. And having that knowledge again, not only is it powerful to be able to use this to sell at a profit, but I think the big thing that I think is underplayed a lot is that it reduces the stress on the farm and knowing where that line is. You know where that line is, you can come up with a plan to manage and deal with it. So I think it's pretty important to do that. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the interest carrying costs on stored grain, I don't think that's something that is talked about enough, especially considering that grain prices are still reasonably high and that the interest rates are high. Now, I'd imagine that if I was offering $10 wheat, $16 canola, I'd probably be able to buy quite a bit of product at those prices. But if we're just using round numbers here, we can see that if we're to sit on $10 wheat for 6 months, and if we're using 9% interest, that's almost 50 cents per bushel for that period of time, or it's about 8 cents per bushel per month using those numbers. Canola is a little bit higher because, again, it's worth more. That 6 month period is about 72 bushels or 72 cents per bushel, nearly a buck a bushel, or 12 cents per bushel per month. So if we have grain in inventory, we owe, say, trade credit or operating funds on it, we can see that there's a cost to that. Look into the cash advance program, the advance payment program. They've made some changes recently, increased the interest-free amounts. If we're looking at sitting on this, they do offer post-harvest advances. Take away some of that interest costs because it could be quite considerable. So it's something that we should just be aware of, that there's risk. There's risk in everything, right? But risk with storing grain, there's risk of spoilage. There's a cost to it, as we've seen in the grain bin rental calculator, as we've seen in the aeration numbers that we throw up, but then also in the interest carrying costs. There's risk with that. All right, time for some fertilizer discussion. Fertilizer prices have come down a little bit, especially compared to last season. I'm looking at it more year over year rather than just in the last week or month or something like that. But if we talk about it on a season by season basis, they've come down. But are they any cheaper? And that's something that I'm not sure that they are when we take the big picture of things. This slide here is urea. So on the left-hand side, we can see our charting, and we do a fertilizer price survey. We do it twice a year, spring and fall. And we can see here the red is the previous fall, the blue is the spring for the season that it's going to be used. And generally we see, and to no one's surprise, that buying in the fall is generally a little bit cheaper than buying it in the spring immediately before you need it. Asterisk on that one is last year there was a price inversion where it was cheaper in the spring and fall. It seems to happen about every 10 to 15 years. I believe the last time it significantly happened was in 08, 09. So it does happen, but generally speaking, it is a little cheaper in fall than the spring. Our fall number is just over 800 bucks a ton. The blue 23, 24 spring number, I don't have any magical powers. I don't know what it is. We just put a 50-ton carry on it, a $50 a ton carry on it. We'll update it when time comes, but it allows us to just use some numbers based on historical averages and be able to come up with some charting here. So on the right hand side, and this is I think actually the more important slide, if you ask me, this slide here is the affordability of fertilizer. So this is how many bushels of grain is required to purchase 1 ton of urea. The top red grouping is wheat, and the bottom blue is canola. And essentially, the dotted lines that go through these charts, that's the average amount of bushels of grain required to purchase 1 ton. So if we're above the line, it's expensive. If we're below the line, it's cheap. And as we can see here with both wheat and canola, it's still reasonably expensive. And the reason for that is even though we've seen fertilizer costs go down, going back to this chart, it's come down. The price of grain has come down as well. And essentially, we're looking at these numbers. There's not a whole lot of difference in the affordability of urea looking at these charts. It's come down slightly, but it's still expensive. And that's something that, again, there's risk. Using that four-letter R word again, there's risk, and we need to be able to be aware of that risk and set up plans to be able to manage it. Let's move to FOSS to look at FOSS here. Again, on the left-hand side is our charting. Prices come down, and again, we've just estimated spring 24 price just based on some carrying costs. But again, we look at the affordability. Again, how many bushels of grain is required to purchase 1 ton of FOSS? And we look at both the wheat and the canola, and it's still expensive compared to the average. So we still have some risk in this, and the price of fertilizer is still expensive relative to the price of grain. So what to do with fertilizer? I've spent a lot of time on fertilizer in the last little bit here. I don't want to group people into groups, but I'm going to do it anyways, just for the sake of discussion. And it seems like I come into this, people will pull me aside and say, "Well, Darren, it's too expensive to ban." And then I'll get another side pull me over to the other side and say, "You know what, Darren, it's too expensive not to ban. You got to ban." You know what? Nothing's for free in life. I feel like, it's what I tell my kids when send them out to the world, and there's always choices, right? And when we talk about it's too expensive to ban, well, the challenges with not banning is that we do face increased fertilizer losses. There is an increased potential to under-fertilize crops if we don't factor in the inefficiency of fertilizer. There's an increased potential for off-target nutrient movement, and then there's increased costs when using inhibitors when the government's not funding those inhibitors. But again, nothing's for free, and if we're on the banding side, we're faced with higher equipment costs, workload, especially if we're looking at spring banding. If we're looking again at staying with spring banding, there's potential for a longer seeding period because we're not as efficient. We can't tank up 320 acres of seed and just go. We got to stop more. And we're a little bit more sensitive to fertilizer interruptions, especially again if we're looking at spring banding. So again, nothing's for free, but you know what? We can put dollar signs to these challenges so that we can again make that educated decision on what works best for ourselves and our farm and on our situation. So when we look at increased fertilizer losses on the choosing not to ban, we can look at anywhere from $14 to $35 an acre. That's using just over $800 a ton urea. That's assuming that we are comparing, say, a fall broadcast, which is the least efficient, to a fall band or spring broadcast, which about have the same efficiency. We're comparing those to the spring band, which has the best efficiency. So, and that's on a 100-pound an acre ANS application. So there's $14 to $35 an acre there. The big one, though, and maybe I should have led with this, but I think this is the silent killer on the farm. This is the thing that I think is very impactful, is the increased potential to under-fertilize crops. So if you go back to this first step here and you say, no, I'm going to choose a broadcast or choose a timing that's a little less efficient, but I'm not going to increase my fertilizer rates, we can start looking at this. And maybe it might not happen in the first year or two. When I start saying, well, how much losses do we have? When I ask my soil science friends that, I get the same answer that I often give my kids when they ask for something. It depends. It does depend on a lot of things, but we can start to look at a yield slide if we under fertilize crops, especially over the long term. And the worst thing about this, it's a silent killer. We don't see it on our farm, especially when we have the same practice over all of our acres on our farm. We don't see it. And if we start to see a little slide in the yields, it hurts. But the thing is if we're looking at even, let's just take a canola 5 bushel an acre lower yield, that's 70, 80 bucks an acre, but that's all profit. That's the gravy. That's the last 5 bushels on each acre, your 5 bushels, because those previous 35, 40, 45 bushels, they got to go pay everybody off. Those last ones are yours. And this thing kicks so hard because it's all profit. So that's something that we got to make sure. And we remember those slides back, we talked about what our yields were using that 44 bushels, and our break-even price, was reasonable. Well, if we take 5 bushels off that, we're at 39 bushels, and all of a sudden our break-even price is higher. And if we start to see a run on the market, all of a sudden we run out of profitability quicker than someone who gets a few extra bushels an acre. You got to yield. And this is something that's important to do, is to not under-fertilize these crops. That's the big one here. Again, potential for off-target movement, looking at a fall app of phos. Again, if we're choosing not to apply the extra fertilizer because we're inefficient, there's a costing. But if we do choose to apply it, that comes at some significant costs. And then again, inhibitors, great products. My financial brain looks at them as insurance products that buys us time. Time's important. Time has value, but it doesn't cure all of the problems. So there's still a cost to that. And yes, there is government funding programs now, and that's great. But we got to be careful not to rely on them, because again, it buys us time, but it doesn't buy us any surety in things, unless you know when the next rain's coming, which we don't. That's the issue with that. But again, banning's not without its thorns and its roses as well. And we often will see higher equipment costs, right? It's a significant investment to put mid-row banders on, for example, or to buy a fall banding. So there's costs with that. But we can again quantify those costs. And if we're looking at, say, a $50,000 to a $400,000 investment, if we're taking over 10 years and applying fertilizer on 2,000 acres per year, just do up a loan amortization schedule and divide it by the acres, and we can see how many dollars per acre it's actually going to cost us in doing this. There's increased workload, no doubt about that. Again, we can put dollars on that. If we have to hire an extra laborer or seasonal laborer, we can see it's like in this example, $30,000, and again, the 2,000 acres per year is $15 an acre of extra cost. One thing I've been asked by some of my soil science colleagues is, well, spring banding's nice, but you know what? You can't go as fast. And what happens if you get delayed? Well, we can use the MESC yield data with date seeded, and I'll use wheat for example. If we seed 1 week later than our 100% yield factoring threshold, which is usually first, second week of May, if we get pushed back a week, well, we could see a 10% yield loss. And if we're saying that 500 acres, that's at $65 an acre, it's not insignificant. So we do have to figure that out. And also fertilizer supply interruptions, that one's a harder one to quantify. We do have to be aware of that. We do have to take steps to make sure that doesn't happen. I would say that's more of a planning thing more than anything. So wrapping up my presentation, coming up with a couple resources, our 2024 crop cost of production. We're working on that now. We're looking at it's roughly a December 2023 release when we come out with that in advance of all the trade shows in the new year. So look forward to that and see how the numbers change with that. The other big resource that we're doing, and this is actually our number one resource for downloads and requests out of the offices, is our farm machinery cost of production, or the custom rental rate guide. We're busy working on that right now. We're hoping to be releasing this in the month of November, and it's something that gets a lot of use. And maybe if Lionel can come on the call, I'm going to quiz Lionel here. So which piece of equipment, Lionel, do you think increased the most since the last time we did this guide? So we did this guide 2 years ago, okay? And we're doing this, and we're polishing up the numbers right now. So between four-wheel drive tractors, between combines and sprayers, which of those three do you think went up the most in the last 2 years?
I'd have to say combines.
Combines, okay. Well, let's see how accurate you are. And actually, it's been sprayers that gone up the most, 31%. Now, that being said, it's all pretty tight. That's pretty close, right? They've all taken a significant jump, but it's interesting when we're doing this guide to see where these costs are coming in. We're noticing some costs have gone up considerably. Others haven't gone up as much, and it's just interesting whether it's I dread to use supply chain, or that's an overused phrase in my mind, or if it's the technology that's going into some of these items, or it's demand, or it's the productivity boosts that adapting or adopting these new technologies can have on the farm. So it's interesting to see where these values come. But this guide's a really good guide. I know a lot of farm families use it when they own different pieces of equipment, and they do a reconciliation at the end of the year and say, okay, well, I used your piece of equipment for so many hours, you use mine, and they come up and square up the books at the end of the day, or whether it's neighbors helping neighbors out. Again, it's a pretty good guide. And the last year, or not last year's, 2 years ago guide, the 22-23 guide, we've had some feedback that it is a little bit lower in value, and that obviously it is just because the last 2 years we've seen a lot of movement in equipment prices. We've done this guide now for quite a few guides, and this last guide has seen the biggest jumps between guides that we've seen, which I don't think is a surprise to anyone when I say that. So that wraps up my end of things, Lionel. My contact information is there. You don't agree with anything I say, you want more information on anything I said, you want a good debate, I'm up for anything. That's my direct line, my direct email. Please reach out. And also on feedback and any of our resources. We're always looking to make these resources better, and always interested in the discussion. We get great support from our clients giving us feedback. So if you ever wanted to give feedback, please reach out. We're definitely open to that. We want to make good resources, and resources that help both our farmers and advisors in the egg industry in Manitoba.
Okay, Darren, that was a real good presentation. A lot of really good information, so that's good. I guess when you think about it, sprayers have probably changed a lot more than all the other pieces of equipment we just looked at. After you said that, I was going, yeah, you don't see many pull type sprayers in the fields anymore. Everybody's got a high clearance, and they've probably changed the most in technology. So you were right.
They have, and yeah, and so when we're pricing this out, and then maybe that might even be a time for another crop talk discussion about some of these values that we've seen, and how we determine these values, and how the custom rate or the custom rates and the rental rates are determined. But we spec out a middle of the road spec piece of equipment. But I will say that we do see the costs of the options and the optical options for spot spraying. Those are pretty hefty price tags, and it's pretty interesting to be able to see the paybacks on those type of technologies. But it's not free, and our costing doesn't include those. Maybe in the future it might, as they become more regular for more people speccing them out. But there's a lot of technology on this equipment now, and it's and obviously it has to come at a cost, because technology isn't free.
Okay, we did get a couple questions. So the first one is, when you valued the value of grain aeration, was there a value for having the bin with the fan, or is that included in the bin value?
It could be both ways. It depends which way you look at it. Again, if we look at a new costing, it gets to be very easy to segregate out those. We can say, oh, a bin is, $6.50 a bushel for a hopper bin, $3-4, $3.50-$4 for a flat bottom bin, and then an aeration kit is this much more, and then the fan kit is that much more. Again, when some of these fans are quite pricey. When we get into older bins, generally we just look at the whole amount, unless I've talked to people who've spent $2,000 on a new fan because their fan needed to be replaced. So then they'll put that $2,000 in over and above the bin cost because they feel they need to recoup that, because they wouldn't buy it otherwise for renting out the bin. So fair enough, they should be reimbursed for that. So it does get more difficult, though, I will admit, as these bins get older, how we value that bin, because there's still value there, but obviously they're not the cost of a new bin, because the cost of these new bins have really jumped, just like the farm equipment. The bin costing has really jumped in the last couple of years.
So your calculation for the fan was basically a one-to-one, basically whatever the producer had to pay for the hydro is what they were charging for the fan.
Yeah, that was the electricity costs.
Yeah.
Now you can make the argument, it's like, well, these fans don't operate indefinitely, that they do wear out over time. Those aeration costs just accounted for the cost of the electricity. So producers, or so the owners of the fans, the bin owners, I've talked to some and they said, well, it was $22, and some cents per day. I'm going to charge $25 a day, and that'll cover, any repairs they may have to do. And because you know what, even if something goes wrong, you need to get an electrician out. That's really expensive. So there should be some margin for repairs in there. But again, it needs to be reasonable. Like how much repairs are there on a grain bin in a year? I would argue it's probably not a lot. It's going to be more on the moving parts. So if you have a bin unload system, the electrical, those types of things, that's where that repair amount comes in. And I think in the examples we're using is around $1,000, just over $1,000. Again, we can factor that in for that repair rate, and essentially we're charging that with the idea that we're going to have to spend that as a bin owner to do some fixing up on some of this equipment as each year goes by.
Okay, and one other question is, when you were working on the grain drawing, and I think it was this be referring to the slide with corn, did you have a value of the grain in there?
Yes, it's the cost per ton, and I think it was. Do you want me to scroll back in slides, or?
Yeah,
it was $265 a ton that we were using. Sorry for the jumping through all these slides backwards. So in this one, it would be the estimated market price, and this is $265 a ton for grain. So it's on a per ton basis. So yeah, so you can put different
so
numbers
as the
in there.
grain value of the grain increases, the cost of the drying increases?
It would be in. So it would probably be more looking at the costing in the hour, but we'd have to play with that to see. I'm not too sure. Most of the numbers that we move, we don't move them too large. So as you can see here, we don't see a large movement in some of these costing. To go from $5 corn to $8 corn, I'd have to run the numbers and see.
Okay.
It would probably be more it'd be down in here, the cost of over drying that we would see. That if the grain price is higher, the cost of over drying is going to be higher. So it's more going to be in that area. You see the price of grain come in.
Okay, and my question is, what's freight from your place to the Acme Grain Company in Dog River?
Yeah, Dog River. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's $15 a ton, let's say. No, yeah, we're had to come up with some names, and some of those are actually names from our farm management predecessors that have put in there. So we've held on to that for prosperity's sake, and to honor the work that they've done, and the work that they've done on these calculators. So yeah. So, but didn't that elevator burn down or it came down? I've heard that maybe I'm wrong on that.
I'm not
TV show.
100% sure, but I just wanted to let you know that I was paying close attention.
That's good. Well, see, I gave you just a slight warning, but I figured we better ask you some hard questions here, just to keep you on your toes too.
Okay, well, thank you, Darren. That was a good presentation, and I look forward to having you on again when you get a few more things updated, especially the rental guide, because you are right, there are a lot of people that use that, and I think it's a very valuable tool. So thanks again.
You betcha.
Okay, we're going to go to the crop scouting panel, and I've got one major question for today, and this one is for Marla. And I guess we're getting to that time of year where we might be running into some deadlines for fertilizer application and manure application. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity for Marla maybe to update us on that and the guidelines for that. And the one guy that did call me was actually wondering if they were thinking about doing any extensions. So Marla, if you could help us with that one.
Yeah, no problem. So the winter deadlines for application is November 9th at 11:59 p.m. So based on the Manitoba manure mortalities and manure management regulation, as well as the nutrient management regulation, both of those outline winter as being kind of defined from November 10th until April 10th inclusive, which means that the ban begins essentially on November 10th for winter spreading. So that means winter application or application of manure. It also means application of any fertilizer that contains nitrogen or phosphorus in it. So if you're talking about dry fertilizer and hydrous, then that exact same kind of deadline is then at 11:59 p.m. on November 9th for application. Now, there isn't anything that's going to kind of cut it before that. So if there is a bit of snow on the ground, you can still be able to apply, as long as the soil isn't so frozen that you don't get closure behind if you're trying to knife things in. But that is essentially something to keep in mind, that soil conditions can impact kind of closure, especially if you're talking about putting down something like anhydrous. But the deadline to stop applying is just that November 10th start date. I have not heard anything yet about an extension to that. That is something that our colleagues at Environment and Climate will occasionally do based on the weather. Looking at the long-term forecast right now, with the temperature starting to dip below zero and the daily highs dipping below zero, I don't expect that there will be an extension beyond that November 9th at midnight deadline, just because it doesn't look like the soil conditions will be such that they'll be thawed and able to take on any, to basically apply effectively with having proper closure.
Okay, good. No, I was starting to get a few questions about you get some of the custom corral cleaners and stuff that haven't had a chance to
Yeah.
with harvest, and they're wondering if if there's going to be some extensions and how long can we keep going. So
Yeah, individually, people can apply for winter kind of emergency permits. And so that is on an individual basis, that they may allow that if there's no other option. That being said, if you're dealing with corral cleanouts, you do have the option to winter store, so stockpiling the manure. So it's not a requirement to have to spread it immediately. With something that is a solid manure, you can stockpile it. So stockpiling is allowed. Obviously, you can move and pile that manure, and then that pile that is created just has to be spread prior to November 10th of the following year. So after this November 10th, if you needed to do your corral cleanouts and were stockpiling, you've got basically just under a year or around a year in order to apply it.
okay, well, that's good information. Thanks, Marla. And I just got the news that the elevator at Dog River did burn down. So I guess Darren won't be delivering any grain there in the near future. Okay, so a few more slides here. just one regarding where we are in harvest in Manitoba here, and we're doing our final report for this week is happening this week, so it won't be ready or isn't ready right now. But just a little bit of a kind of an update of where we were from last week to this week. Last week we were right around the 90% complete. I think we're probably, in that 95% complete now. I think you can jump the canola numbers up to just about 100%. I think most of the canola that was out there got completed over the last few days, and there might be just the odd field out there, but I think the majority has been done. I think soybeans as well are probably closer to 100% complete as well. So two crops I think that still would be out there are corn and sunflowers, which probably isn't something that's that far out of line, as in a lot of cases those crops are harvested when there's snow on the ground and conditions get a little bit colder. So probably in that 95 to 98% complete. So we had a good run this last week to help us get up there and get things completed. Just a few things that are happening over the next little while. And the Manitoba Watershed Conference is going to be happening in Brandon, and that's going to happen from December 4th to the 6th. So if you're interested in seeing what's happening there, go to their website and see what's happening at their meetings, see what's some of the programs that might be available in your area. There's several projects happening across the province, and there's always new things they're looking at. So if you're interested in doing some projects on your farm, it might be a good event to attend. I mentioned last week that the CAP is going to be having their annual district meetings. If you go to their website, there is a list of locations and times in Manitoba. So just go to their website if you're interested in attending the next the CAP district meeting. Manitoba Agronomist Conference. Here's a conference that always gets great turnout. So registrations are now open. So it starts on Wednesday, December 13th and goes through Thursday, December 14th. Go to the website. There's early registration on right now, and the deadline for early registration is Sunday, November 26th. So make sure to take advantage of the cheaper prices. Crop Connect Conference, February 14th to 15th. I understand registration is also available for that as well. Crop Residue Burning Program, maybe not as much of an issue now that the ground is turning white, and it's going to be a lot whiter by tomorrow, so there may not be as much areas that are going to be doing much burning this fall. Something that might be more of interest is the hay listing service. Guys are starting to look at inventories and seeing if they have either enough hay to go through this the winter season, or have some extra hay. So if you're looking at selling some, there's the 2 contact numbers to phone to get your information onto the listing service. And if you're looking for hay, just go to that website, and all the information on amounts and locations of the hay that's for sale is available there. Environmental farm planning. If you're interested in doing projects on your farm, a lot of them have you need to have your environmental farm plan done. So this is online, it's available. So if you don't have one and you're looking, now is the time to look at getting it. The farm extension specialist in the province, here's the numbers and their locations, so please feel free to contact them anytime. The livestock specialists, I would imagine a lot of them are in Brandon, are going to be maybe venturing to Brandon over the next couple of days as Livestock Expo, or AgX, sorry, is on. So if you're going to be in Brandon, make sure you stop in at the Keystone Center for AgX. And if you see any of them, make sure to talk to them. They might even be able to make an appointment with you if you're looking at a ration balancing project for your farm. The MASC service centers, there's their contact information, and I think a lot of guys are going to be putting together their farm production reports for the year. So I would imagine you'll be contacting a lot of the offices or doing it online over the next little while here. there's the 2 slides regarding the bins. Then Darren had mentioned those at the beginning. And if you have questions, there's the contact information for Lori and myself. We're going to take a little bit of a pause here, and our next Crop Talk will be on November 15th. If you're registered, you would have got that in the email yesterday with the agenda, so you don't need to re-register for those. So join us for the next Crop Talk November 15th. And hopefully we don't get too much snow and we get some nice weather yet to finish the year off. So thanks for attending. Thanks, Darren, for the presentation, and see you on the 15th.